Let's just remind ourselves, this technology is the fastest moving technology of our lifetime. The genie is now out of the bottle. It's here to stay. It is absolutely going to be transformative for businesses and society as a whole. I actually think all business processes could be reimagined with agentic AI.
Welcome to the AI Adoption Podcast. I'm your host, Professor Ashley Braganza, and it delights me to welcome Paul O'Sullivan from Salesforce to this episode. Paul, before we get started, could I ask you to introduce yourself and say a little bit about Salesforce as well, please?
Sure thing, Ashley. And look, thank you very much for having me this morning. My name is Paul O'Sullivan. I'm the Senior Vice President of Solution Engineering for the UK and Ireland here at Salesforce and our Chief Technology Officer for the UK. Salesforce is the #1 CRM globally. It has incredible innovation and technology available for our customers to really help them connect with their customers in a whole new way. Myself personally, I've been operating and working in technology and emerging tech for probably about 20 years now. And I'm really excited to kind of share and talk about some of the innovation that's coming with this agentic revolution that we see ourselves in. So thank you for having me, Ashley.
Paul, thank you for the introduction to Salesforce and yourself. Let's get into the conversation because AI isn't new. It's been around for quite a while. I wondered if you could give listeners a quick rundown on some of the developments that have taken place.
Yeah, sure thing, Ashley. Look, and I'll try and distill 75 years of AI innovation, breakthroughs, and creativity. If we think back to kind of the early 1950s, where Alan Turing, who coined the first phrase, machine learning intelligence, that was kind of the start. It was the epiphany. It was that moment in time where people were like, okay, what happens if machines could really think and be intelligent? But we've seen over the history of this, over decades of innovation and creativity and breakthroughs, we've seen progressively AI becoming more and more to the forefront. Now, if we look at going back through some of those notable events, things like where we started with machine learning techniques and the ability for machines to understand vast amounts of data and then make a prediction or an output from that data. We've then kind of progressively moved through from predictive AI and machine learning into what we now see as generative AI. And obviously everybody knows the breakthrough that OpenAI with ChatGPT had in November 2022 was a moment that everybody looked at this technology and just took a moment and went, wow, this is incredible. But in the build up to that one moment in November 2022, which is only 3 years ago, there was a lot of very successful breakthroughs that took us to that point. Everything from different training techniques to neural networks, backpropagation. These innovations and breakthroughs have all contributed to where we've got to today. So we're only at the start of something in this AI space that is going to be truly transformational for every walk of life that we have today. But there's also, Ashley, as you know, there has been over that 75-year history, some what we would classify as AI winters. So there have been moments in time over those decades where AI innovation has also slowed down. And I think there is questions emerging at the moment that you and I have talked about separately around, are we in a bubble? And I think irrespective of the bubble and all of the innovation that we've actually seen over these decades, one thing will still hold true, which is the infrastructure that this will bring to fruition. You know, I would describe this as, well, we look at GPT and generative AI and transformers, I would describe this as the genie is now out of the bottle. It's here to stay, and it is absolutely going to be transformative for businesses and society as a whole.
That transformation, Paul, how is that going to be impacting what happens in the workplace, particularly in terms of agentic AI and AI agents? How do you see that playing out in terms of workflows in organizations?
When we look at kind of over the decades, businesses and organizations have tried to do a lot more process automation, optimize workflows, etc. And they've always done that around the human and the individual that would have to fulfill tasks or jobs within that workflow. I think when we look at this combination of workflow plus generative AI and combine that with the ability to bring reasoning and understanding around what you're trying to achieve, it is going to be it's going to be an absolute game changer. So if we think about these workflows over the decades and throughout all of this innovation, organizations and companies have actually started to look at process automation, process optimization, and they've done that in the constraint of their organization and the individuals within their business. Now, as we step forward and we combine all of those techniques like process automation and optimization combined with AI capability, and especially what we now phrase as agentic AI, and the ability to combine agents, digital workers that can work alongside humans within the workforce, what we're going to find is we're going to see new workflows and processes emerge, right? What is the agentic business of the future? What do those agentic workflows and work processes look like? And I think what we'll find is this will be a really unique opportunity to lift the individuals and the humans, the human workers, to really focus on that meaningful, high purpose, rewarding task that they can't do today because they're bogged down in a lot of the systematical kind of process flow and how they have to operate within their business. So combining workflows with agentic capabilities is going to be a huge unlock for enterprises.
Moving the conversation on, organizations are trying quite rapidly now to put together some kind of AI technology strategy. And I just wondered if you could, again, help listeners to understand what would be the main components of a strong AI strategy.
Yeah, great question, Ashley. And I think this is where people do get quite philosophical in their focus and response, because, and I think it's necessary as well, because if we now think of this innovation, and going back to your first question around the history of AI, we also saw breakthroughs in the early 2000s from a hardware capacity perspective and GPUs and the mass amount of investment that's had to go into GPUs. So when we think about strategy, we also need to think about the sustainability impact, the ethical considerations, the data, the volume of all of this processing. We also need to look at the impact on the workforce. And I think that's a real key consideration, because most of your listeners will be aware of or have heard of some of the publications recently that suggests 95% of AI pilots or projects fail. And I think the reason and driver behind those failures is ultimately because of a couple of things. One, is the project actually linked to real business value? Two, have you taken your entire organization on the journey with you? So think about the human element and your workforce. There is still a fear, I think, within workforces around, is AI going to take my job? And the reality of this should be, it should enable you and supercharge you in your role. It should allow you more freedom for creativity and working on high value tasks. I also think businesses are still not reimagining their organization powered by AI. And I think this is a limiting factor, the lack of ability to think creatively. And what do I mean by that? Very similar to what you just mentioned. How are processes going to change with AI? I actually think all business processes could be reimagined with agentic AI at the heart of it, because organizations over time have been built based on its human capital and how much it can scale. So there's a huge opportunity here to reimagine your business from front to back. I also think there's an element here of AI projects are being spun up to test and learn, but not linked. And I think this really comes back to how to have a pathway to production. So if I think about, my career in software engineering and delivery of large scale projects, you would always have a methodology that would take you from start to finish. There would be a path to production in that. There would be testing cycles. There would be, all of the guardrails and trust and components that you need to build around it to make sure that the solution you bring to market is fit for purpose for your organization. And I think one of the challenges I see today is the fact that generative AI is still probabilistic in its output. It's not deterministic. So if you think about running your business operations, you need some level of deterministic output to be able to achieve your results. So again, using AI in the right areas to deliver the right outcomes for your business is absolutely crucial. And then fundamentally underneath that is still the components that we just talked about, which is data, ethics, sustainability, scalability, resilience. We've seen actually resilience is a hot topic at the moment because AI can be used for both good and bad. It can be used to help scale your business and help you offer that real deep personalized experience for your customers and that level of always on concierge delight and make it a wonderful experience for your customers. But there's also a kind of dark side of AI around potential malicious threats that we all need to be vigilant about and make sure that we've got the right controls and guardrails in place.
I'd like to explore this in a little more detail because, I'm a little bit fed up of hearing this phrase. Data is the oil of this modern AI era. Because if there's one thing that's really badly managed in many organizations, it's data. How does an organization get itself ready in terms of data, and being able to benefit from and exploit the opportunities of AI?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ashley, and I don't think I've used that phrase now for probably 4 or 5 years, but I am familiar with the phrase. Data is the new oil. Um, this is an interesting one because I think the vast amount of data that companies and enterprises sit on can actually paralyze their organization. And let me explain that. Um, they can paralyze an organization because when you're going on a transformation journey, like trying to apply AI technology within your business or within your processes, etc., companies quite often look at it and they go, I've got all of this data in all of these disparate systems. I need a data program or project to bring that all together.
Mhm.
And in reality, we've been trying to solve the data conundrum for probably 20 or 30 years. Um, and if you think back through the history of technology, you know, systems were typically monolithic. They were large systems built for stability. Um, but when we moved into kind of an always-on society with the launch of the internet, um, the consumers drove the need for more agility within enterprises and companies. And with that level of agility, we started to break down those systems and, techniques like service-oriented architecture, microservices, all of those things started to come to fruition. And as we started to break down these systems to serve our customers, we started to build data silos. And, I think statistically it says on average, uh, an enterprise has 977 disconnected systems. But what we're now realizing, and again, because of this question around data and how data will fuel AI, is large companies are starting to kind of put their arms around their data again and say, well, actually, I need my data lake or my data warehouse. I need to be able to drive insights from my data, and then I need to curate how my data is going to be used. But when we think about agentic AI, that large data transformation could paralyze your ability to get value from AI really quickly. So one of the things that I recommend to companies when I talk to them is we start to look at the process and the objective or the outcome that you're trying to achieve in a single view. And that workflow or process could be anything. We could go back to the supply chain and logistics piece for an example. And then I say to companies, okay, let's look at the data that's required for that workflow and just that data. Because if you try and tackle the data problem as a whole, you're going to spend years trying to achieve that. Where actually, if you just try and address the data problem for one workflow, that can add immediate value to your business, that could only, that might just take you a couple of days to try and identify that data and activate that data in that workflow or operationalize that data. One of the things when you start identifying the data that you need to do, and now I'm kind of showing my previous life as a consultant, is look at it from the concept of the 5 V's of big data. And I talk to people about the 5 V's of big data, but it really comes down to 3, which is what's the value of your data? What's the value for your business? The second one is what's the veracity, and then what's the velocity? When was that data last updated? How accurate is that data? And actually, if you apply that lens, you will very quickly be able to identify the data the data in conjunction with the AI is going to deliver some value for your organization. So data is still absolutely crucial to applying AI and giving it that level of accuracy and understanding and embedding, etc. But I always worry when customers feel and businesses feel that they need to do a whole data transformation program, because they'll lose a lot of time to value that agentic AI can give to them.
Paul, we've talked about some of the opportunities. I wonder whether you could reflect on kind of what are some of the things that are holding boards back from adopting AI. There's a lot of talk about the dark side of AI, and I just wondered if you could give us your reflections on that, please.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. I think the dark side of AI is a really interesting one, because I think we've all seen the potential that AI and agentic AI can offer enterprises and businesses. But we are also seeing a surge in what I would say use of AI for malicious activity. And I think organizations have to be very, very cautious and vigilant on this. So just wanted to kind of give you a bit of a range of things that we need to be mindful of. So if you think about malware creation, for an example, right? With the use of AI, AI can design malware in a polymorphic manner, right? So it means it's constantly changing its signature, it's constantly changing and evolving. So those threats and attacks can be very difficult to identify. So I think that we've really got to be vigilant on that front. Then we've also got deep fakes, identity and credential theft and abuse. We're having a conversation at the moment, and hopefully none of our listeners will use my voice and capture it for voice biometric analysis to replicate me. But again, this is a real threat because the technology is there now. Then we've also got disinformation or manipulation and influence based on vast amount of data. Is it real? Can you trust it? So that whole fake news, which we've actually seen come into the mainstream headlines, has had the board members really kind of cautious and do they want any information out there to be non-authentic or represent them incorrectly? And all of these potential vulnerabilities and threats can be done at massive scales, because this technology now is not just readily available, but combined with things like cloud computing, we can see huge problems in this space. So when I think about this and think about what the board members need to be considered about, and again, this is linked into one of the components that will come into anybody's strategy when they look to apply AI, is how do I not just be sustainable focused, ethical focused, but also I have an external view of how could AI potentially be used against me as an organization? And it's a pretty horrific thought. So, we could probably move back onto the goodness now, but I think it's something that we need to be considered when we think about where the application of AI can really be used for good and obviously the dark side as well.
Great. Thank you. This notion of when an organization comes to AI, the usual questions are, do we build it ourselves? Do we buy it all in? Do we do a kind of hybrid? Just your thoughts on what are the different implications of whether an organization should buy, build, or do a mix or a hybrid between the two?
This technology let's just remind ourselves, this technology is the fastest moving technology of our lifetime. So for an organization or any company out there looking to say, I can build all this myself, I think it's a task that it's like climbing Mount Everest. To try and build everything that's happening in the world of AI and all of the controls and things that you need around it is going to be an impossible task for an organization that, you know, maybe a retailer or maybe a transport organization or maybe a financial services organization, because in reality, your core business is your core business. You're either going to be a retailer, you know, that provides goods and services to customers. You could be a financial institute that provides banking services. You know, you could be an insurance company that underwrites risk. That's your core business. So when I think about organizations that are trying to look and say, can I build all of this? I would be very, very wary. Now, there's also another aspect to this, which is if we think about the large language model, the large language model is effectively what powers things like ChatGPT. It's the conversing and being able to interface and communicate with the technology using natural language. Now, these LLMs, since ChatGPT launched in November 2022, we've now seen a peripheral of these in the market. You know, we're 3 years on, you've got Gemini, Anthropics, Perplexity, DeepSeek. The list is long. You only have to go onto huggingface.co to see the long list of over 40,000 different models that are available out there. I think when you look at the pace of change and these models being developed, some have started to become a commodity, the prices have dropped. So if you're building a solution around those models, by the time you've built something on that model, the whole world has shifted on again. So I believe that there's a hybrid, or there's a who do you partner with? Because if you think about the world of AI, it's not just the model. You need the ability to connect the model to all of your data, structured, unstructured data, semantic data, metadata. You then need the ability to connect it to all of your apps across all of your business lines. You also need to have the tools around the language models, things like retrieval augmentation generation, so that you can ground the data plus the model to give a more contextual intelligence response. And then you also need, you know, to rethink trust. How do you identify toxicity, bias, hallucinations, all of those things? How do you make sure that you have got the right levels of permissions and access and control? And all of that. And we've still not even talked about scalability and resilience. So to build it yourself, it's a huge undertaking. And my recommendation is maybe there's a hybrid, maybe there's an opportunity to accelerate and look at partners that can actually move you quickly. We are, as you know, Ashley, we're investing significant amount of engineering effort within Salesforce to build our agentic platform, which is obviously Agentforce. This is no small feat. So my recommendation to anybody listening to this is just consider the different technologies and partner with technology providers that can help accelerate you, focus on your core business. You're sitting on your data is going to be the thing that really unlocks and supercharges your business value, combined with an AI technology out there. So it's I don't know if I've answered your question, Ashley, but it's a really big challenge, and I think companies need to navigate this with a huge level of sensitivity, because if you try and build all of this on your own from scratch, you're going to spend hundreds of millions and not necessarily get the results that you're looking for.
I think what's come through, Paul, is that this build, buy, or some kind of hybrid is what business leaders should be spending quite a bit of time to understand for their particular circumstances, for their particular context, what makes sense for them, and how that is likely to play out in their particular circumstances. Clearly, given the rapid pace of change in terms of these technologies, decision needs to, you know, the build it yourself decision has to be taken with some level of care, is what's coming through for me. Paul, given your role as CTO and you're at that leading, if not bleeding edge of AI and AI technology development, I'm going to ask you to look into the crystal ball and give us a view as to where you think this technology is going to be. When I'm even as I'm thinking about this question, I'm thinking over the next 5 years. But 5 years in AI seems like forever. You might as well talk in centuries in the way AI is moving. Let's just take even a couple of years. Where do you think these technologies are going to be in a couple of years? If we were 2 years from today, what would we be talking about as being at the cutting edge?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think that we are seeing more and more AI come into consumers, the world of consumers, the world of just, you and I in our everyday lives, our social interactions. Um, we're going to see that continue. We're going to see this explosion. And I think as society becomes more and more comfortable with AI, um, in and around them and in their everyday lives. I mean, we've all got smartphones in our pockets. They all have some level of AI already on that device. But what we're going to see is we're probably going to see a surge in things like robotics. Um, we're going to see a surge in robotics whereby we'll see new techniques to training models. So a great example of this is I was reading the other day around the concept of algorithms that can identify touch. So if you think about robotics and you think of, and I know when we say robotics, people immediately go to humanoids and things like that, but it may be robotic arms in a factory. It may be, intelligent traffic light systems based on flow of traffic. It may be robotics in delivery and logistics and more automated vehicles and things like that. So there is a significant variation here, but what we'll see is new algorithms kind of emerge to capture more data. And when we look at this as well, we'll see a combination of different algorithms working in conjunction with each other. So the whole concept of multimodal. So the
Mhm.
ability to take, use NLP, natural language processing, so text to speech. We'll see vision kind of algorithms with being able to analyze what they see in and around them. And then obviously touch algorithms, which was the piece I was just mentioning, which is based on the density of the object, how much pressure can I apply to physically interact with that object? Um, and these are things that I think are still in development, being researched, um, but we will continue to progressively get better at those. Then what we will see as well, so that's in the kind of learning and algorithm and kind of development space. But what we'll also see, Ashley, I think, is more and more industry adoption and use cases. If we think about what AI has already done in the world of healthcare and life sciences, you know, it's only going to continue at an accelerated pace because to be able to run simulations, diagnostics, to get to the answers quicker that could save a human life, why wouldn't we have more of that? Why wouldn't we scale that? Taking more industry kind of approaches. We've self-driving cars. Um, if you go back 5, 10 years ago, would have been a thing of fiction that you and I would have seen on, something like Back to the Future, because I'm a bit of a movie fanboy. But now it is actually there, or it's thereabouts. But it does pose really interesting dilemmas and questions because if we think about the ability to allow a self-driving car to be fully autonomous, the calculated risk of impact, should that be down to the algorithm or the software engineer that wrote that, or should it be something else? Is it the manufacturer? Who takes the liability? So there's still some unanswered questions, but I think as we become more and more accepting within a society, we will see more and more of these technologies that are kind of in their niches at the moment. So Waymo's in San Francisco. A year ago, I was in one, and they're still being trained and developed. but we will probably soon see those kind of come through. Now, you might not see them in the consumer space immediately, but you might see it in the logistics space, where there is short-term routes that are predictable and low risk. So I think this is we're going to see more and more of this incredible innovation bleed into society, but also offer real industry value. You know, healthcare, financial services, logistics, supply chain optimization. Um, and it's going to be phenomenal. But again, in the crystal ball format, it's a really interesting one because I I I think the pace of change is one thing. We don't know how quickly these will come in or not. Um, but also there is a level of creativity in this field at the moment that could unlock some really, really cool things. And then also, sorry, Ashley, while I've got you, I'll and you've asked the question, you've sparked my own level of creativity. If I think about AI at the moment versus what might happen if you have things, if you have this convergence of technology between AI plus quantum plus, you know, immutable data or verified data to some extent, is there this convergence that can actually, again, kind of bring us on tenfold and take us into the future even quicker? So it's going to be really interesting. I don't have all the answers. I don't think any of us really have all the answers. I think we're on this journey together, but I strongly do believe we need to approach it, consider it, and consider it as a transformational moment in all of our lifetime.
Paul, that's really an interesting set of insights in terms of where this is going. And I fully agree. I don't think any of us have the answer, but I think what we can and need to start to do, and organizations need to start to do, is to prepare the ground for a range of possibilities. I don't think there's going to be any one magic solution that organizations will necessarily be able to go down, but I think it's knowing or having some insight that actually here are some potential areas of development, and then starting to at least, as I say, be prepared for which ones might emerge based on the evidence that comes through as these developments are released. Paul, thank you so much for being on the AI Adoption Podcast. You have covered a huge amount of ground. I mean, everything from giving our listeners a primer almost in terms of what some of these terms are, because sometimes it can be quite confusing, quite baffling for people who are not in the industry to understand what some of the terminology is that gets used. But also, I think you really covered very clearly what organizations need to do to overcome this big data challenge, and this notion that what we should not do is try to kind of boil the ocean in one big data management project, but to actually look at it in much smaller pieces, I think is a really interesting insight. And then finally, your thoughts about where we're going into the future. And yeah, really interesting. So thank you so much, Paul, for being on the AI Adoption Podcast.
Thank you, Ashley, for having me. I really appreciate it.